Hello, and welcome to another episode of Storied Arcs. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are diving deep. Get it? Deep. Underwater Welder. Nope.
No response. Nothing. I'm not giving it to you.
That's fine. There's still music playing. People can chuckle quietly to themselves. They feel so inclined or take great pity on me. Anyway, Underwater Welder. If you listen to our Zero episode, you know we've covered the synopsis. We've covered Jeff Lemire. I could keep talking about Jeff Lemire, so we're going to dive straight into the book. And I guess maybe even 10,000 foot view. What do you think of this book? What do you rate this book? If I hadn't suggested this, would this have been on your list, or would it have been further down the list?
If you hadn't suggested it, I don't know if I would have put it up as a possibility for us, not because I don't like it, but because I think on my personal Jeff Lemire power rankings, it's Essex County. But Essex County is a large tome. It's a big sprawling story. That would be we'd have to break that up into probably three different episodes, probably maybe four. Even though it's really one collected issue, I think it was three smaller books. So I would have defaulted to that because that is my favorite Jeff Lemire story. But Underwater Welder is my second favorite, and I wouldn't have thought of it if you hadn't kind of posited the idea of, hey, let's maybe do a one shot, an original graphic novel, something that's self-contained we can talk about in one fell swoop. And so I'm glad you did, because this is a book that I hadn't reread in a while, and as I got into it, I remember the story and some of the beats of it, but as I got into it, and you start getting into like when you see in the flashback and he finds the pocket watch with his dad, and then you see it on the bottom of the ocean, and then he tries to go out the first time and he doesn't reach it, and he's pulled back up, and they think he's like had an episode, and he goes back down, and as I'm reading it, the emotions I remember about the story, those beats were coming back to me, and it was almost like it kept building and building. So when we got to the end and we got some of that catharsis with Jack and his father Peter, it's almost like I felt it more on a reread, because I kind of knew it was coming, and I was remembering not just reading it, but I was remembering what I was feeling the first time I read it. So I kind of got that double dose of emotion again, and it really landed, and it really hit this time around as a reread. Then I think
I'm a serial rereader, rewatcher for this reason, that the first time I'm so busy absorbing, just trying to take in everything that's there, wrap my head around the plot, right? Yeah. And I can't feel it the way that I can in subsequent readings and watchings, which makes again my preference for what we're doing here, the limited runs, the short story arcs, because it's like, I really love Tom King's Batman arc. How often am I going to sit down and reread 85 straight issues? I mean, for Tom King, actually, I that was a bad example because I would do that. Yeah. But for if it's
but it's different than rereading Mr. Miracle 12 issues, him and Mitch Garrett's
totally different. Yeah, that's a one afternoon.
Yeah.
And it's very, very different than saying like, oh, I want to go reread Mark Waid's run on the Flash, and it's like, I don't know if he was cranking them out like crazy or if he was doing on it for 20 years, but it seems like there are hundreds. I know that that's not even possible, but if it's like, oh, I'm going to go read all of the Flash prior to New 52, meaning starting in 1980 through 2010, 30 years of Flash, because I want to experience the whole run again. It's just not practical. I mean, someone probably does it, but I love a tight one-bound volume. And you can get this from the library and listen to the podcast and interact, as opposed to even Paper Girls, 6 arcs. If you didn't want to buy it and you were getting it from the library, and you get to volume 3 and you were listening to the podcast, after it's all been released, and then you see that there's a 4-person hold line for volume 4, and you're like, crap, I just lost all my momentum. I either have to start shelling out $17 a volume now and have only 4, 5, 6, or only 4, or I have to wait a month and a half and then dive back into my binging. There's nothing worse than an interrupted binge.
especially if you're really feeling it, if you're in it and you're really digging it, and if there's something out of your control where you got to stop. Yeah, you said you can lose all momentum like that. And you don't have an issue like that. I think it's
like
book
when you're
like
watching West Wing on Netflix and it switches to HBO Max.
Yeah, it's tough. But it's a book like this that is, you can sit down. And I think, this isn't the kind of book. It's got chapters, per se. There are divisions, natural divisions in there. But I mean,
they're unnatural divisions. They're supernatural divisions because, like,
one is
like 20, 30 pages, and the next one's like 80.
There are breaks in the story where it feels like the story takes a breath.
Yes,
but
literally come up for air.
Yeah,
see, I can keep it going all day.
You know what? I'm going to power through every.
In the words of Captain America's musical, I can do this all day.
I'm going to power.
If I could sing it, I would.
I'm going to ignore every single one of those. But yeah, there are pauses there. They're just like commas, but yeah, they don't really feel like story breaks or chapter breaks. It's just we're hitting pause here for a second. We're regrouping and we're going back into the story.
I get to those title cards,
and
I'm not about to put it down.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, it's more just to kind of reframe the reader as to kind of where we are. That it's less about chapter 2, put it down. I'll come back to it tomorrow. It doesn't read that way to me.
Right, and as a reader, I don't think this book really demands that much from you.
No,
I think the art is very straightforward. We'll talk about the art a little bit more, and I think the dialogue feels human and real. And also real, and it's sparse, and how sparse it can be. There are pages and pages without words.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
some of the conversation is like, it's so mundane.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about their breakfast order or something like that. There's no subtext or anything like that. They're just real people.
Yeah, they're actually talking about breakfast.
Yeah, and maybe this is a time for you to talk about the archetypes.
Sure.
Of Jeff Lemire, because to me, the everyman vibe of this is what should give it an even broader appeal than it has.
Yeah, I think so. It is, one of my initial barriers to reading Jeff's work was the art style, which I'll admit I didn't get at first. I remember looking at it and seeing it on some things and being like, like it didn't land with me. I didn't understand what he was trying to say with this art. And it wasn't until like I kind of got over myself and actually read the substance of it and got the meaning of the stories he was telling. And once I understood that, I looked back at the art and it kind of hit me the idea of like, the art is not meant to be spectacular. It's not meant to be showy.
Right.
It's meant to seem like this could be anybody and everybody. And I think we talked earlier about his, the way he draws characters, and that's a common complaint about his work is that everyone looks the same. All his characters look the same, and that's not unfair. I think I mentioned earlier to you off air that I think he has 5 character types. He's got boy, girl, woman, thin man, big man.
And occasionally now dog.
Yeah, that's true. There could be pet, and it's usually, I think it's usually dog. But but every
or frog that looks like a dog, or dog that looks like a frog.
Every character in his story usually fits into one of those categories. They're always typically drawn the same. Even in the story here, where we effectively only have 4 characters. We have the Joseph family, main character Jack, his wife Susie, Jack's dad Peter, who disappeared when he was 10, and Jack's mother. Peter's ex-wife Dory. Think about that. So Jack is thin man, and in the flashbacks he's boy. His dad Peter is just also thin man. He disappears when he's.
But the 2 thin men never exist simultaneously.
Never.
In time.
Yeah, and there is no really big man here. Susie and Dory they're just woman. Even one is kind of middle-aged woman and one is younger woman. But they're just drawn as people. They're not. It's not important that they look super distinct and all that, and even in a book where characters are super distinct, something like Sweet Tooth, because these are animal human hybrids.
There they have antlers and things like that to distinguish them.
They still really look. You see them in the faces, whether Sweet Tooth has an antlers for his head or There's a character that's got a peak snout. They all kind of look the same. And I think what he's trying to say is that, yeah, the art is important. It's part of storytelling, but the idea that it could be anyone and anywhere. Or not really. Right. And even when it's not anywhere, it's very specifically a bay, was it Tiggs Bay in Nova Scotia, Canada?
Right.
It's a very specific place, but the idea that it's not meant to be, character design is not meant to be, look at Jack, he's so distinct. That's our main character.
Right.
He stands out because
and
how he's drawn, here he's supposed to, I think there's a deliberate parallel here specifically that the idea that Jack as an adult is supposed to look and mimic like his father looked. Because there's the idea of fathers and sons, parents and children in this book. So that's very specific, and that's also something that's very specific to a lot of Lemire stuff. The idea of family and lineage,
right,
and the relationships of parents to children, parents to grandparents to grandchildren, all of that, generations of family. And so by everyone kind of looking the same, it's meant to show that this is all how it's all connected, and it's not about being visually differentiated. That's not,
and unlike a lot
cool character
of modern comics, and certainly Big Two, none of the appeal of his work is that the characters are sexy.
Yeah.
Like either physically or like there's nothing inherently super interesting about Jack.
Yeah.
He's just a guy.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a good psychological piece about a guy. But he is the any man. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, in fact, I now am so accustomed. I love like the honesty of this art to the point where sometimes when you read superhero stuff from the Big Two, it feels like so contrived and so fake. It's so polished.
Well, yeah.
It's this went through a bunch of studio suits and, they swap in and out artists to keep the production, up and going. Yeah. And everyone looks incredible. Yeah, unless they're not supposed to, and then they look really bad.
Well, I think that that's what you sign up for. And like, listen, I love Clay Mann's art. Clay Mann draws sexy people.
Right.
Like, it does not matter when the books that he's done recently, specifically with Tom King, all the Batman stuff, like he draws sexy people, and that's just what he does.
Who else does stuff, is Tim Seeley.
Yeah, Tim Seeley, yeah.
I was talking to him at a convention one time, and I said, man, I really loved your work on Grayson, which was Tom King, right?
They
started it.
They co-wrote those. Yeah, they co-wrote them, yeah. But
I didn't know he took writing credit. I thought he was the artist.
No,
Tim Seeley.
But Seeley also, he
to be clear, Tom King was never the artist.
Yes.
We've seen what he can do. And it's stick figures, and they're not even good stick figures.
No, they're intentionally bad, I think, at this point. But no, there are plenty of, there's a house style at the Big Two, and that's just how it is. And even if, they're some of the creator-owned work, people have their styles, and some people they just draw sexy people. Jeff doesn't draw that. Lemire just draws folks.
Yeah. I think this is how he sees people too.
Yeah. Well, and also I think it's, that there's maybe something to be said about that was these are the people that he saw growing up. He's very, 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 very proud Canadian. Kind of a blue collar town, blue collar worker, and the stories that he writes about are about their regular folks. There may be some potentially supernatural element to it. Hearing voices from beyond, time travel. There's always maybe something there where you're talking to a figure from your past, a ghost or something like that. Are you actually talking to them? It's unclear, but fundamentally, all of his characters are just regular people. They're regular people trying to live their lives, usually dealing with some level of generational trauma, family trauma, whatever, trying to deal with it and trying to grapple with it and looking for some level of catharsis.
There's always like a kind of existential dread.
Yeah.
It frequently comes from generational stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think, to me, it's like there's... I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. In like Wes Anderson movies, he loves shooting colorful, symmetrical shots with a character that is bored out of their minds.
Yeah.
They cannot stand the banality of everything around them.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's his style. And as far as his character is concerned, everything is plastic, everything is fake. It's like this is all a beautiful facade for basically a nothingness underneath. And I think Lemire has that type of, obviously not the same message or the same style, but that's his distinct thing. And it's like Wes Anderson technically does different genres of things, but you are in the movie theater and you see 5 seconds of a trailer and you're like,
that's a Wes Anderson
That's
character.
Wes Anderson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I see it, the camera is panning from side to side on a symmetrical set, and everything's vivid and colorful except for an extremely bored looking person, sometimes bandaged, like physically wounded in some way. And it's like, yeah, that's Wes Anderson. In the same way you walk into a comic shop and when you see a Jeff Lemire thing, you can spot it from a good ways away, and you know what the struggle will be.
Yeah.
You don't know the setting, you don't know the plot, you don't know the characters, except it will be man, boy, woman, dog,
and it'll probably be in Canada. So
it more than likely will be in
Canada.
Canada, which honestly, not enough stuff is set in Canada. It's perfectly lovely. I love Toronto.
Toronto's a really great city. Really,
and
really great
I tried to figure out, I was trying to sleuth the last time I was there. I went to 4 different comic shops and I was asking them all if they knew which one Jeff went to. And I was like, maybe because
Canadians too nice. They're not going to give that up. They're not going to snitch.
No, and I wasn't trying to ambush him or anything. I just wanted to know if he, who wrote the book, Fault in Our Stars, and
John Green.
John Green. So John Green, on his TikTok, will go into a random Target or a Meijer or something and go to the book section and find Turtles All the Way Down and sign all the copies and just stream it on his TikTok and be like, I'm in this city. I went to a Target, and everyone goes to every Target. And I'm like, maybe Jeff would do that. Maybe he's just signing random books and putting them back on the rack.
I believe Neil Gaiman has done that before. I think in airports. I think when his book,
that's cool.
When his book North Mythology came out, I think if he saw it in an airport, he would sign a couple random ones and just leave them there. And so, yeah, if you followed him on Twitter or whatnot, and you saw that he was flying out of, I don't know, Dulles or Reagan or something out of DC, and you try to find the bookshop. So yeah, I think it's cool when some authors do that. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
I'm like, if he has a local comic shop, maybe he's occasionally doing pinups or posters or. Just little exclusive things,
or maybe a local signing in that shop.
Right. I mean, if I was a comic artist and I had a local brick and mortar store that was my store, I could pump so much money into them just by doing one drawing a month, one sketch a month, and they could sell it for a couple $100.
Yeah, and
pure profit.
There are plenty of guys I know. If I'm trying to think of some of the guys, some of the kind of big name creators now who will shout out their stores that they go to. I know, whether it's DC or New York, a lot of creators live in the Portland area, so you can, they always want to try to shout out their local shops, whenever they can, try to, they understand, because most of them were patrons of shops back in the day.
Oh yeah, I think if they, especially if they had one before, they
a lot
made
of them,
it.
A lot of them worked in shops,
right?
So,
and by the way,
great shops out there, local shops.
Jeff does sell a lot of his pages. I've tried really hard to find a page of Underwater Welder to buy, but Cadence Comic Art, which I'll put in the show notes on our website, you can go there at any given time. Right now, I just pulled it up. They do have 873 original art pages, which just speaks, I think, to how prolific he is.
Yeah.
And I own a piece of Royal City, and I own one original art page that I think I paid $125, which is extremely reasonable by his current going rate.
And that's your only piece of original art?
That's my only piece of Jeff Lemire original art.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can tell you, you can see, I've seen pictures of him sitting at his studio desk, with the big easel. It's an awkward sized piece. It's not 8.5 by 11 piece. No. It's not 11 by 17, and it doesn't even neatly scale down to that. So as we talk about this book, I think the first note that I took is, aside from the art, which is the sketch, the crude look, and you can see, I don't know how he did this. On the front cover, he didn't really draw pupils or eyes, but you can see the terror in the face.
Yeah.
Without much detail.
Which is also, I think what's interesting is that he does that with lines kind of on the brow and the forehead, around the eyes and all that, except that when you see his characters normally, like, he draws, like,
they're always ragged.
They're always lines. They're always there. Everyone looks tired. Everyone looks like they've been through the ringer. But yeah, he has done something where you look at that face and you think, whatever this person is staring at, like, it's frightening him, but it's also like, it's alluring. It's enticing him. Whatever it is, he can't look away from it. And yeah, it seems so very simple, and yet you could give me 1,000 tries and I couldn't come close to doing that.
Right. And by the way, the book is dedicated for Gus, which I assume is his son's name, not the character in Sweet Tooth.
I think so. Maybe that's a pretty good guess. That's a pretty good guess.
So I don't know his son's name, but I would imagine there's no way you can write this without it being to some degree autobiographical, right?
It'd be really impressive if you
had this imagination.
If you could, well, not its imagination, but I think the specificity of it. Like,
right. And I think this is a couple years in the back. It says he already has a son.
Yeah.
So this is probably reflecting on his panic at month 8. Yes.
Yeah. It's lived experience.
And you mentioned that my kid will have to listen to this podcast. Mm-hmm. His kid has to read this book.
Yeah.
And presumably he just passed right along the generational struggle that he depicts so frequently in his work. And so it's like, okay, just keep it going. Keep it spinning plates. But even jumping to page 2, you start to see it. That's a full page 1 with no boundaries. That's kind of odd. Most of these pages are boxed in some way, and most of them are 4x3 grids. Sometimes they're 4x1 vertically, 4 rows. And the 4 rows, I think, is a little rare. Even in Lemire's work, I think 3 rows is what I think of as a standard comic, right? You have your full page, you have your 2-page spread, and most things are 3 rows, sometimes 1 column, sometimes 3 columns.
Yeah, well, it is. It's probably the most prevalent. You think of, because if you have 3 rows, that subdivides pretty easily into your 9-panel grid.
Right.
3 rows. When I think of 3 horizontal rows across the page, I think of Darwin Cook's New Frontier, which is just solid like that. Now, I'm trying to think, 4 rows. I think.
I mean, it's hard to memorize what you're reading.
But I think
I'm calling attention to something that's subconscious.
I do think very memorably, one that I can think of right now that I should have thought of earlier was the opening pages of All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. It's 4 panels, 4 horizontal panels like that, and each box has 2 words, and it perfectly sums up on one page in 8 words total the origin of Superman on Krypton and all that, like dying planet, loving parents, something like that. But
that's captured as a distinct beat.
Yes, yeah.
And the same way in Paper Girls, when we get all 4 girls' timelines progressing at the same time,
yes,
it's 4, and we drew attention to it there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm just saying it's distinct, and I also think perhaps he's drawing these on oversized things. And
a lot of times
in order, because I can't imagine
comic
drawing.
Art is you're drawing on an oversized sheet,
right?
And that gets shrunk down. But yeah, this is this 4 row paneling or page layout. I mean, he effectively holds to it all the way through, and he just plays with the number of panels. Maybe he subdivides it all the way down to 12.
Right, and he has a lot of fun with it.
He does, yeah.
On page 9, for instance, you've got 4 panels, and it starts 4 panels, and there are clean breaks and a border around all of them, but the lyrics from the radio permeate across all 4 panels. Then the next page, 4 panels again, following page. Then you get the 4x1 followed by 3x3. Mm-hmm. Then the following page, you have a 1x1, a 2x1, and then 3x3. And I love the way he plays with the boundaries of it, because you establish a bit of a reading pace. going one by one by one by one by one. And anytime there's a break to it, it calls attention.
Yeah. And I like that you call it, especially this early here, because, the page where which is, what is that? Page 12, where it's close up on the razor. And it starts off with the one panel on top, which gives you an idea of, okay, it's the razor in the sink. And then you have all these close-ups of him shaving and him nicking himself.
Right,
and
which is called back to later.
That's all isolated in each one of those 9 panels below. And then the next page, on page 13, which I so love, again, it's 11 panels. And the one panel that's doubled is the panel of Susie, his pregnant wife, laying on the bed.
Right.
The idea
and you could argue that if there were a line there, one panel would be his wife, one panel would be his child.
Yes.
If you took the straight line from that page and drew it straight up.
And I think that's intentional there.
Oh, yeah.
Which is why, and so, there is a version of this book, because you then see in the next row below that, it's close up on Susie's face, then Jack's face, then a close up on her belly.
Right.
Which is their child right there.
And that's about the happiest Jack looks in the entire book. And so I think
that's the only time he smiles until the end. And
right. And I think, but this is important.
Do we call that a smile?
That's a Lemire smile.
Yeah,
that's a giddy laughter for Lemire.
That is.
But no, I think that's important because of this. There's a way to read this book where you're just kind of like, Jack's a selfish jerk, and he doesn't appreciate his wife, and he doesn't appreciate his coming kid and his life. And I feel such empathy for him, because I'm like, no, he really does love those things, but he's a broken man.
Yeah. And
he's trying to figure out how to love those things, how to keep moving forward when, he's stunted at a part of his emotional development. And so it makes me happy to see that warm smile on his face, knowing the horrible fights that are coming.
Yeah. And even right after that, when they're at breakfast, it's, they're talking about it, but they're laughing. They're enjoying the company.
Well, yeah. And he'll say a snarky thing.
Yeah.
And she knows it's in love.
Yeah. And so,
can flick the napkin wrapper.
Even though he's leaving at this fairly critical time to go back to work to get some more shifts in, there is, I think, what we're shown, and what I think you're safe to believe, is that there's genuine love there. Loves his wife, and he is looking forward. It's a lived-in relationship, and he's looking forward. He is looking forward to being a father, even though it probably does scare him. You can see the way we're introduced to Jack is that this is a happy time and a happy moment for him. Even though he's going off, getting a few shifts, he is thinking in his mind, hey, I got to go do this because we need some more money or whatever. But he is genuinely anticipating this next chapter of his life. And at least, because the things that are going to crop up in him don't arise. They're there beneath the surface, but I don't think he quite knows it
beneath
yet.
The surface,
yes.
Yeah,
he
I knew you would join me.
See, I walked right into that one.
I know.
And I didn't even see it until you said something.
I know.
And
you're trying to play in the shallow end.
And now I wanna end this podcast right now and just okay.
Maybe I can find a little puddle splashing sound every time there's a water joke.
Do not do that.
Okay.
Do not. But no, so yeah, because I think you're right. It's important about Jack's character, to go back to that. The idea that, because by the time you get through the middle of this book, after he goes off.
If you were dropped in the middle, if you didn't get this little intro, you would have a bad read of the character.
You think this guy, and thus when you get to the end and there's some redemption, you're like, this guy didn't earn it. Like, what the hell? Like, what are we doing here?
Right.
Why
do I care if he's happy?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Because everything we see from him, he is not happy. So it's not until he gets out onto the rig and goes down, does his shift, and when it's being down in the water there, in that moment, and maybe it's the confluence of all those things and the presence of the watch right there that he sees, that all these things that maybe he's been keeping down, that maybe he doesn't even know he's been keeping down. Maybe he's been living his life.
He moved away to college.
Yeah, and then
came back.
And then came back.
And
so
it seems like he doesn't ever try to explain why or justify himself.
Yeah. And you get the sense that I think when Susie, and then when they talk about it, maybe it's with them and with his mother, that she went along with that. like there was part of her that understood because of maybe what happened.
Right.
Because again,
or his mom's there.
Yeah, his mom's there.
Yeah.
Again, there's this connection because he grew up there and his father disappeared and died that night, and then when he was 10 on Halloween. So there's maybe on some level she understands that it's important that he goes back there. Even if she didn't understand it, she was in.
Right.
We're going to go back. We're going to go and we'll do this. You're going to find work. And even if it's not the kind of work he thought he was going to do, he's going to go and do this because it's important. And if she doesn't get it, she's going to be along with for the ride. So maybe these are things that were subconsciously driving Jack's decisions, and he didn't know it. And now he's here with his wife. He's about to have his kid. He's looking forward to this. Is going to be great, and he's really, really happy. But maybe he's put up a mask so long he doesn't realize it's a mask, and it's not until he gets down into the water when all of that blows open. And then because when he comes back out, because he's down there, he sees the watch, this pocket watch, and he's going for it, and then starts hearing these voices. Then he like passes out, and he's got to be pulled up and rescued. And everyone on the rig is like, "Yo, what happened?" And you're kind of playing it off like, "Oh, maybe the oxygen was a little off. I passed out."
Right.
And they send him. Obviously, at that point, you send him back to shore. The half-hour boat ride back to the bay.
Right.
And there's something different there clearly where he's like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm totally fine. No big deal. I can, I can go back out there again." And you can see now there's a shift there. Something is cracked in him. And now he's driven by something else because he doesn't know what that is yet. But he is no longer the guy that went out there because now kind of the real, I mean, that's harsh. I mean, that's true. The real Jack is coming out, the part that he's tried to suppress.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I like it's all real Jack.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that was harsh.
No, but I understand. Like, I didn't want to
the full
be pedantic.
The full version of himself.
And certainly the part he needs to overcome in order to not be his father.
Yeah.
Because he's currently on a trajectory to be his father, which his wife points out to him eventually here, and damn line picking up static and. That's it, Jack. Time to wake up. It's time.
He's hearing all these voices, and he's not certain. Is he hearing the guy on the rig? And we, the reader, don't know either. Is he hearing the guy on the rig in the radio? Are these voices from somewhere else? Obviously, we find out later that these are what we anticipate. We can assume he's hearing in this moment is his father. Because we see these lines repeated from his father. But at the time, when we're reading it, you don't know. You say, is it coming from the rig, the radio down? Is it voices in his head? It's all this kind of confusion, and as the reader, we share Jack's confusion, and then he wakes up on deck, and it's like, hey, what happened there? And again, they just kind of play it off. He's like, oh yeah, I'll be fine, because he obviously doesn't want to tell anybody that there was this trigger of seeing this pocket watch down there, and he was going for that. He left his welding
that's
gear.
not a sane thing that you could say or would make sense to anyone. Yeah. And if someone did poke about it, you'd have to tell them things about yourself you do not want to share.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's gone into great detail with Susan about it.
It's unclear. Yeah, how much detail his story has gone into. Now it does seem though that his wife Susie has a pretty good relationship with Jack's mother, so her mother-in-law.
Right.
I guess the idea of when Jack's on the rig and he's away from shore that she's by herself. She mentioned she didn't really know anybody, so she spends time with Dory. So I have to assume they've talked. So she must know some of the specifics. But again, there is still a mystery around what happened to Peter.
Right.
What you do know is he was a salvage diver. He went into the bay and he was always talking about finding that big score.
And he ran a pawn shop.
Yeah. He's always about finding that big score. And he was an alcoholic. And so, 2 and 2 together.
And divorced and a derelict father. And all
2 and 2 together. You drink too much, go out in the ocean, go for a dive, don't come back. I have to assume she knows that much. But in terms of, maybe, I doubt he's let her know how much it really affected him, because I think
right, or that he feels responsible for it.
Yeah,
which is obviously complete garbage. When you read it, you're like, "There's no way you killed your father," but the fact that he thinks he does.
It's a child's point of view, though. He's 10.
Right.
And
it's boy.
Yeah. And when no one else is there to tell you otherwise,
Right.
you're going to carry that. And so while I don't think he's told Susie much of this, I think it's because he shut it down himself. I think there's a part of him that as he grew up and then eventually leaves for university, he has shut that down because it was so heavy on him that he's tried to, he's almost like compartmentalized that. He's put that away somewhere where he can't get to it, and he's lived his life, and he's found some measure of happiness now. He's back there. But in the water, in that moment, seeing the pocket watch again, that part of him that he compartmentalized, I said, that came up and said he became his complete self now. And because he hasn't dealt with this part of himself in so long, maybe since he was 10 or 12, maybe it's been since he was a kid. He's never dealt with that. So he hasn't been his whole experience.
Yeah. To me is the relatable part of the story.
Yeah, it all rushed back to him.
We all have something like that, hopefully not as traumatic as a parent dying.
It all came back to him, and he didn't know how to deal with it. It freaked him out.
The next thing I want to jump into, though, is the symbolism of water in this book. Mm-hmm. If you go to page 49, this right after shore leave, he goes to the doctor. Susie picks him up, brings him home, and he immediately retreats into water.
Yeah, gets into a bath.
Right, he gets into a bath. His dad was a diver. He's an underwater welder. Anytime he's both searching for answers and is looking for solace and solitude, water is his answer, which is interesting. Historically, you could go through all of literary history and show how water in some way symbolizes everything. When it's raining, it's transformation and change or repentance or whatever. But in the ancient world, water was symbolized chaos. It was because it was like an uncharted, unwieldy,
unpredictable
monster. Yeah, it was unpredictable and it was chaos. And I'm not clear how exactly we're meant to understand it here, except that what it means to Jack.
Yeah.
And what it means to Jack is isolation and searching and contemplation.
It's almost here like it's meant to be transformational or almost like transportational. Like,
ooh, yeah.
He goes into water, whether it's in a bath or when he's diving for his work, he's going to another, like, obviously he's physically going to another place because he's going from above water to below water, but it's like his consciousness has moved. That's where he taps into the inner part of himself, whether it's memory, whether it's,
and like 50-51, you literally see him sinking, and as soon as he's underwater, he's transported.
And he wakes up, and he's underwater. Yeah, exactly. So you think about other ways that water is depicted, whether it's a cleansing thing, like a baptism ritual kind of thing. It is almost like he goes into water to go to the place of himself that maybe he had locked away. So we talked about that piece of him that maybe he had forgotten about or intentionally blocked off. That being underwater is the only way, because of his connection with his father, and he has wired his brain to that's the place where he is, I guess, vulnerable enough, or also maybe safe enough where he can access that. He can't do that on land. He can't do that walking around talking to his wife or his mother or his coworkers or whatever. And maybe it's the solitude he needs because that's his connection with his father. Because he would dive, he would be there with his father when he died. When he would go and do his dives and his salvages to the stuff that he could hopefully try to sell and pawn off. So it's almost like it's
well, and he was never allowed in the water with his dad. No, right?
Well, because he was 10 at the time. But again, clearly at some point he ends up with the ability, to be a licensed diver and to do this work. So
which presumably
he did later.
He got
in life.
into but also curious, like what is it my dad saw down here? What did he find down here? Where did he go down here?
And that's I think one thing we don't get is what is his. We maybe understand his motivation for going back home. We talked about that. The idea of there's still this unfettered, well,
I think there's this
thing with his father,
there's this
his
thing
family.
of like, what if dad comes back? I want to be here in case he does.
Yeah, but the idea that like he didn't go to school like to be a blue collar worker like
an English lit major.
Yeah. So maybe he did because not a lot of jobs for
Extremely
that.
low blow.
Yeah, it's rough for some people in this room. Potentially.
Yeah. No.
But yeah, but
I'm much more employable than English lit. I was philosophy.
But the idea that he has moved back home and okay, we're good with that. But now he's taken a job that maybe Susie thinks is quote unquote beneath him.
Everyone thinks it's beneath him. His boss thinks it's beneath him. His boss is like, if I got to go to college like you did, I would not be on this rig right now.
Well,
if I had an 8-month pregnant wife, I wouldn't be on this rig right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the guy doesn't seem like a guy who hates it. I think he just sees it for what it is. He's like, it's work.
It's a job. I can get money.
Yeah, it's a job.
But the thing we don't get though is at what point in Jack's life from the age of 10 when his dad disappears to now is he drawn to the water? Because you have to assume that he doesn't move back to Tiggs Bay as an adult and just start diving.
And it's only in the second half of this that he's looking for the watch.
Yes, yeah.
He repressed that. It's completely gone.
Yeah.
In fact, when he wants to see the watch again because it jogged his memory,
Yeah.
he goes to his mom's house and starts going through his stuff.
Yeah, he doesn't
He's
know.
like, right. He forgets that he threw it in the water
because he thinks that first trigger at the end of the first chapter, he's convinced that watch was a hallucination. It wasn't actually there. So he's trying to reach for it, and that's when he passed out, hears the voices, wakes up back on deck, goes back shore. You're right. When he thinks about the watch, he goes back to his mom's house, look for that stuff, doesn't know it's there because he's not even certain what happened that first time is real. But it's gnawing at him that, oh yeah, the watch. There's something there. What does that watch mean? What does that watch trigger? Because he has repressed that. He has shut that
I gotta
down.
say, the really brutal beat in this that I think is true to so many stories is his mother is there and available and loving and provided for him and protected him, and he has no interest in her at all. He is only interested in this man who
was never there.
And I want to understand the complexity of Peter.
Yeah.
I think Peter genuinely loved his son.
Yes.
But was so deeply flawed and broken.
Didn't know how to do it. Didn't know how to show it.
Didn't know how to do it. And I think Jack is back on that path. Yeah. Because there's this really beautiful, page 58, he gets out of the bath, has his like, oh no moment when he realizes he slipped into another hallucination. But then he comes in and snuggles his wife's stomach and reads her from memory this song or poem that I think he got from his father.
Yes.
Which means, there were really beautiful moments between him and his father.
It is almost like, like the memory we're going to get to here of this dive where Peter wakes him up and they go down to this dive early in the morning, and when they're done, when they get back to his mother's, to Dory's house, drop him off. She's basically like, you can't take him to do this. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
And Peter's like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. He said the truck, it was all good. And
and I wasn't drinking.
Yeah.
Well, I had one beer.
And it's almost like from Jack's point of view, he's like, yeah, I'm spending time with my dad.
Right.
That it doesn't matter what we're doing at this point, it doesn't matter why. From his perspective, it's just I'm spending time with my dad. And so that's the part that he latches onto. That's the happy part. The memory, it's completely immaterial what they're doing. Like, I'm sure.
And I think he at that tender age.
Yeah, I'm sure he remembers time probably when they're just sitting in the bar.
What do you think?
And his dad's just drinking.
How old do you think he is in the boy scenes here? 10, 12?
Yeah, I think he's meant to be 10 right before his dad dies. Because his dad dies when he's 10.
Yes, and I think that is the age where any adult who shows interest in you is the coolest adult you've ever seen in your life. And I think to have a father, also especially a father figure, show so much interest, verbally and when he's present, and then deny you that level of attention by not showing up, not honoring his commitments, not being there, getting into fights with your mom, which didn't seem to bother him that much, but had to on some level.
Well, it also could be because maybe at that age doesn't know how to process that. And then after his dad's disappearance, all that stuff just gets pushed down.
Right.
All of it gets repressed. And so it's not that he didn't know how to deal with it. He didn't. And then he didn't know how to deal with it at the time and then never dealt with it later on until this moment now because he had repressed it all. So yeah, I mean, all the bad things, the idea, the arguments, I think those things he definitely repressed. And what he remembered was, hey, I'm going to hang out with my dad. He's going diving. He's going to bring up this cool stuff, all this awesome stuff from the bottom of the bay. You know, that's what he remembers. And yeah, he has forgotten the specifics around why his dad didn't show up on Halloween when he said he would. He'd forgotten what he was looking for. All those specifics. It was just that what he remembered was just that he got let down one more time. Right. And that was his last memory of it. And then this journey of finding the watch and all those, everything he had boxed away coming back into him all at once. And it's just, it's too much for him, but he has to deal with it in some way. And he comes to grips with it kind of all, kind of in a big torrent rush there. And that's where the conflict that he has in the middle portion, end portion of this book, that all these things that he didn't have the facilities to deal with as a kid, so he never dealt with them at all. Right. Is forced to deal with them as an adult, and he has none of the tools for it because he's never forced to deal with any of these kind of situations. Right.
And this is the thing where it would be a little on the nose. Like if we found out, he had gone and majored in psychology. Yeah. On a subconscious level, he wanted to know what was wrong with himself. Yeah. It's like, no, it's repressed. It was totally gone. Yeah.
Or if he found out that he was, he had kept detailed journals and every night was writing down his thoughts and feelings and
where my dad went.
But he kept that hidden from his wife. It would have been a really clear. I think I say this often on our shows when I start a sentence with a lesser writer or a lesser story would be a lesser version of this story would have been when Jack is when it seems like Jack and Susie have split, when she basically walks out, and he's on his own, that she then finds this huge cache of diaries and journals that Jack's been writing every night on his own in secret, and she reads that and sees the pain and the struggle and all that, and comes to a deeper understanding of what he's going through. That's a much less. It's a much worse version of this book.
Right. It's not only are you hand holding that character of his wife,
you're hand holding the audience.
You're hand holding the audience, which is the greatest sin a writer can commit. And I think his wife doesn't get enough credit, perhaps in this book, which means Jack doesn't give her enough credit. Yeah. But she sees through him all the way through those. That nothing about, if you gave her this book, she would not be surprised by the problem or the resolution. Yeah. And
I think there's something brave maybe in that storytelling that she calls him on his BS. And isn't and there isn't some
and she's not helpless what can I do? He's like this. Yeah. The panel where she says she's talking about his mom. She says, "Did you know he started drinking right after you were born? Can't you see it, Jack? You're turning into him. Mm-hmm. Why can't you just let him go?" Yeah. And the fact that Jack has spent all this time, intentionally or not, thinking on this issue and not hit that conclusion yet. Yeah. And this is page 95, by the way. Top left of 95 is where she says that. This is one where he says, "You don't understand. Something is out there. If I just go back," and she cuts him off, and it's she just told you what you need to do, which is you need to let him go. And he's but if I could just have this one item that attaches me.
I can do it. I can do it. One more chance. Just give me. I know what you said, but hear me out. If I just do one more, I can get there.
And it's and if you get that watch back, and then what? Yeah. It was never a good watch. It's not like he picked it out for you. Mm-hmm. You just took it and were like, "Is this good?" And then when he tried to present it to you, you got mad and threw it in the ocean. And so it's I guess that is his way of absolving his own guilt of saying like
it's a metaphorical.
That's not what killed him.
Yeah, but still, the idea that he is so lost. He's so lost in himself, in his own. He's still lost in his own thing right there. That even though he is standing there, and I'm sure he understands that his response is going to lead to his pregnant wife walking out the door.
Right, and you're on 95.
But he can't help himself.
One more, the third panel on page 96.
Yeah.
Where the lightning illuminates his reflection in the window, and his reflection is his dad.
It's his father.
And it's like, I don't know why. I think it's the fact that they waited. He held this in his holster for so long to reveal, like, this is the ultimate struggle. Is not only did he not let go of his dad, he's becoming his dad because he won't let go of chasing his dad.
And he might not even know it. He might not even be aware that he's happening.
Right. And in the hands, like you say, to borrow your phrase, in the hands of a lesser writer, this tactic of like, oh, he sees his father's reflection in the mirror could be really bad. Mm-hmm. It could be really cheesy or whatever. But that one just cuts to my core when I'm reading this. That
panel, and then the single word in the panel below where it hits him.
Right.
Where maybe he
recognizes
everyone's telling him. His wife just told him that and literally walked out on him. And maybe some part of him is still like, I'm not my dad. Like, I know my dad was like,
I don't even remember what my dad looks like. And then his own face gets lit up and he's like, well, that's what he looked like.
Oh, right.
The guy who abandoned his family, was fixated on some pie in the sky.
It shows
thing.
this level of, so it's not almost like it's not just suppression. There is almost like it's active denial that he's like, I know my dad. I know who my dad was. I'm not him. I'm different. I'm here. We're doing. I'm not him. And everyone around him is saying like, no, you are doing exactly what he did. And he's been convincing himself that he's not doing that. Because he still maybe holds his dad in some other category. So it isn't just he's repressing these thoughts and feelings. He is also actively denying them until he's literally face to face with himself, which is his father.
Right.
So that sequence is so perfect.
Yeah. And then, he goes and canoes himself out again. And I love these narrations because, first of all, I think there is an angle here in which Jack is our protagonist and he's also a victim, which I know some writers say your protagonist can never be the victim. Things can't happen to them. They have to be the one driving the action. That's what makes them a protagonist. But everything is dragging him along, and his action is trying to break through that, even though he is going about it all wrong.
Yeah.
But when he said, my name is Jack Joseph, I'm 33 years old. I'm an underwater welder on an oil rig just off the coast of Tiggs Bay, Nova Scotia. I was born here. I'll probably die here. I'm the same age my dad was when he had me. He disappeared on a Halloween night, 1990. I was 10. First of all, stop. When you're listing facts about yourself and my dad disappeared when I was 10 comes up third, it's like ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Like, that if you were saying this to a counselor, they'd be booking you the next 20 weeks.
Yeah.
They'd
make some notes in the notebook, be like, oh,
like, I'm going to name my first boat after you.
Yeah.
Because it's just a lot of money there. My name is Jack Joseph, and I'm 33 years old, and I have a wife, Susie, and a baby of my own on the way. I should be home with them. I know that. But no matter how much I try and convince myself to just turn around and go home, I know that I have to do this. Until I do, until I find out what's really out there, things will never be right between us. Which us? It's a picture of his wife on the page. Mm-hmm. What's at the bottom of the ocean has absolutely nothing to do with his wife. Mm-hmm. Yet he's saying, oh, things can't be right between us until I go find this piece of junk at the bottom of the ocean.
And this is what I was saying earlier about the idea of there's absolutely a reasonable explanation to be like, hey, listen, my life's about to change forever. Need some time of my own. Need to figure some stuff out. That's a reasonable thing to say and feel. But the way that Jack goes about it is a completely negative way.
Right.
It's a completely egotistical way. He's saying, I got to do this thing that I know I shouldn't be doing. And my wife explicitly said, if you do this, I'm walking out. And I did it anyway because I need to do this, like you said, to get things right between us.
Right.
And I don't even know if he knows what us is. Now, ostensibly, he's writing this letter to Susie.
Right.
So she is reading this.
Yeah.
So
he
she would
definitely thinks it's about him and her.
Yeah.
She's like, she knows. She's
Yeah.
like, this has nothing to do with me.
But he's
and I do need you to have something to do with me.
He's putting it in the guise of, I'm doing this. I have to do this for us.
Right.
Yeah, which is there's a lot of problematic language there. There's a lot of problematic overtones.
Yeah, no, I mean, I say that to my wife when I'm getting up to get a refill on my large popcorn in a movie theater. I'm like, I'm doing this for us. She's like, I had 5 kernels. And I'm like, it's for us. Don't worry about it.
It's for us. Don't worry. Yeah, so there is something incredibly selfish about what he's doing. And again, we know that this is going to end in a fairly cheerful and positive way. He's going to come back, and you know that.
Actually, I didn't know that. I in this book,
well,
the ending genuinely surprises me.
I think so.
Because I think it's just as plausible. This is such a gritty, realistic book,
that he
and
gets
we
lost
know
in it.
we know how often this ends in real life.
Mm-hmm.
People don't break that cycle.
Yeah.
They just continue it and they perpetuate it, and it's tragic. And that's a good story too. Mm-hmm. And as I was reading this, I was like, I remember all the beats. I remember the tension. I remember the angst and the feeling and the anxiety that this produced in me. I actually didn't remember that he goes back. In fact, I thought it was maybe that he's driving out of town. I remember that being very near the end. And I remember him thinking like, my father abandoned me. I'm about to abandon my son. Do I really want to do that? And perhaps it ended right there. Like, we know enough about him
ambiguously, how ending,
which is
turn
how
back or not.
A book that isn't the best, but I might like to do at some point, is 80 After Death by Scott Snyder,
and Jeff Lemire.
Image, and that one has that type of ending.
It really does.
He puts a foot in the water, and you don't know if that's breaking the cycle or continuing the cycle.
Yeah.
And
deliberately, it's deliberately meant to be ambiguous.
Yes,
yeah.
And I love it. That's how a good indie film ends. And this one, it ends positively and in a happy note, but still has that ominous stopwatch as the final panel.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's not all neat. Yeah. Like, it's not like he's done thinking about his father and the watch forever. But he's able to move forward.
He's doing the work, and maybe now actually understands what it means and how to move forward.
Right.
So he's no longer stuck in this kind of arrested development of this mindset of a child. He can move forward. He can be a father to his child, but knowing that that's always going to be there. But now it's not a burden to him.
Right.
Maybe now it's something he's accepted as a part of. But yeah.
By the way,
I think it definitely qualifies as a cheerful ending.
On this page, the number doesn't exist. 101, 102 is the page. We see both Jack and his new son diving.
Yes.
The water is breaking for his wife
as he's breaking the surface.
And he's breaking the surface. And first of all, we get that word plip, which is the sound of water hitting water for Lemire. It happens 3 times. It's when he's shaving. It's when his dad is shaving in a flashback. And here where the water breaks. And I just love this idea that, first of all, his son is already acting like him and diving. Secondly, he is literally moving as far away from his son at a crucial moment as possible, just like his father did to him. And this is where it's like, man, you are deep in the web of this like toxic cycle.
Well, so not only is he in this moment is he diving away from his own son, he's literally diving towards his father by trying to find this watch, and actually, seemingly does find it. This isn't some hallucination.
He does find it, but man, the pages that follow,
they're harrowing. Yeah.
And to me, that's one where I think some people read this and think like something quasi supernatural is happening. Which is not unheard of in Jeff Lemire's books. Royal City, they interact with ghosts. I think Tommy is the character's name. Mm-hmm. And I always read that as like, oh, there's no ghosts. Like, this is a projection. This is them dealing with the loss of their brother,
it's
sibling.
It's just visualized,
and it's visualized, and it feels real to them. Therefore,
yes,
they're acting on it. And I think other people read it and think that this is literal and that
like an actual ghost.
Yes, that like I have heard reviews of people saying like he always has like some supernatural element to it, and I'm like, well, there's nothing supernatural about like having a vision or a dream or something like like or even a premonition that is not inherently supernatural, or deja vu or any of those things. And I think that's about all his ever adds up to. And however, I prefer a more naturalistic reading of it. And I think some people, the supernatural element being in there really enhances it for them. And I'm not sure that's like wrong. I don't think it really has much import on the story.
No,
because it doesn't matter.
Because it's not important. The in this story here, when Jack reaches down and he touches the watch, and he's flooded with these memories, he like looks like he passed out, wakes back up, and he emerges back to the surface, and like the world is different, and he walks around this empty world. What's important is what he's seeing and experiencing, not the mechanics of what happened when he touched, or what did or didn't happen when he touched the watch. Because the story is not about time travel, moving your consciousness through time, anything about that.
Right.
Because if it were, then the specifics of touching the watch and what happens to that moment, that would have been important. That would have been explained. And for some people, that is important as part of the story. But I think for a lot of the stuff that Lemire writes, and you said same thing with like Royal City, it's not important that they're all seeing Tommy, or why he's there. It's just the fact that he is there and they can interact with him in some way.
Right.
That's what's important, not the how. It's the what. And so
right. I literally don't understand how a ghost being real or not real matters as long as the character is growing and moving forward by processing a thing.
Especially something like Royal City, because it's all about interacting with whatever they're seeing, whatever this version of Tommy is. Whether the answers they're getting from him are actually Tommy or ghost Tommy or just their projection sending them feedback they want to hear, that's not the point. The point is they're interacting with this thing. What does this watch do? Does it only, where does he transport it? Is him walking around, is that real, or is it happening in your head?
Right.
It's not important. The point is,
what would Dumbledore say?
The mechanics of touching the watch are irrelevant. But I understand that there are some people who read these stories and that's very important to them. And so they get to something like this, and when there's no explanation, they are then taken out of the story because like, well, where'd he go? What happened? Is this real? I don't know. That kind of pedantic stuff is like crucial to them enjoying the story.
Well,
I don't understand why that is,
and
but
I
some
think
people
there's
like that.
The flip side where some people don't like visualizing the hallucination or the ghosts or whatever.
They don't want concrete. They don't want the thing, by the way.
They're like, I've processed things before and I never had a hallucination or visualized a ghost. It's like, well, just come on. It's a visual medium. Like, you gotta give them something.
Those people, in my mind, are less fun than the group of people who I need to know exactly how this thing works. I don't care that it's supernatural, but you need to explain to me how the supernatural thing works.
Yeah, to me, they're two sides of the same coin. Yeah. They're people who cannot accept an author's choice, and they need everything to be delivered to them only in the way they want to receive it.
Yeah.
And that makes them just bad at reading, bad at watching, bad at listening, and usually bad at interpreting. Because it's like, we don't have time to get into the Star Wars fans of the world, or even like the people turning on the MCU at this point, which I don't think we ever have a venue for us to talk about those things in this podcast.
That'll be tough.
We have lots of thoughts. Write in, go to our website, storiedarcs.com, fill out a comment, and say, we want all of your thoughts on the MCU or on Star Wars.
Maybe we do a bonus episode.
We'll do a bonus mail-in episode.
Just for those
where we don't pretend to talk about a book.
Yeah. That'll be 3 hours of people, of like the 5 people who just want to hear us rant about that. But
you know what's crazy effective here? As soon as chapter 3 starts, if we call them chapters,
sure, time and tide.
It's a flashback immediately of him and his father, and it's so effective that I want more time with his father. Like, I'm eager to see these glimpses, because on one hand, it's like, what's so great about this guy? Like, why is Jack so driven, so drawn to this guy? Now I'm like craning my neck to see more of this guy.
I want to see what Jack sees in him.
And
why does he remember
ultimately
him so
you
fondly?
can't. You know, we have to side with Susie and be like, look, he was kind of a crappy guy, and he was a drunk, and he was not a good father, and he was not good to your mom. Let him go.
Yeah.
And he's probably not still alive. You know, the day before he dies, he abandons him at hockey practice. He walks all the way across town, which we gather is a long, long walk. Where is it where he is going through his dad's old stuff? I think it's maybe even as a boy, and he spots a book from Mexico on the table, and you can tell from that he gathered, oh, my dad just decided to go to Mexico without me, and get that treasure that he was always talking about. It's a very small panel here. When I'm reading, this is the hard thing. When I read books, I underline a lot, and obviously I'm not going to do that with comic books, but it's hard to capture things. That is page 181, which is jumping way ahead of where I currently have my book. Page 181, he's kind of doing his ghost walk through town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it shrinks to him pretending to be a scuba diver or something in his dad's old pawn shop. And he looks at his dad's desk, and you see a book that just says Mexico real big on it. And then you see plip. I guess that's the 4th plip. 5th plip. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the water dripping is a recurring theme that somehow reminds him of his dad, but also he just has this love of water. And we watch that watch just sink and fall. Mm-hmm. Tragic.
Well, we see Jack. Jack is watching. The town is mostly empty, and he's in the past or somewhat, but he's interacting with the younger version of himself, his 10-year-old self. That 10-year-old on Halloween, that night his dad died or went away, and he's watching him throw that watch into the water, and realizing that, or putting it together that that's what his dad was out to try to get for him to find.
Right.
And that's why he went out that night when he probably shouldn't have, because he probably drank too much like every other night. And that's why he never came back. And so that's why 10-year-old Jack carries this burden of, I killed my father. It's my fault. If I hadn't done this, he would still be here. Which, it's to the logical mind, that's ludicrous. But to a grieving 10-year-old kid who's trying to hold on to any shred of anything about his father.
Right.
He's going to carry that weight with him his whole life.
Yeah. By the way, are you a fan? I don't know what your musical taste is. Are you a fan of Iron and Wine?
I know Iron and Wine.
Okay. There is this song on Archive Series Volume Number 1, which is like demos that he recorded and never finished. But he has a song called Slow Black River. And I think when I heard this song, all the images in my head were from Underwater Welder, which is kind of crazy because this song came out in 2015. But the opening stanza is,
lost my watch and chain, but time's not lost. This time we walk together beside the slow black river.
Like, if they do a movie version, first of all, this is one of those things where it's such a perfect use of the medium, there's no reason to ever adapt it. However, if you did adapt this, I've got the soundtrack picked out already. Starts with Iron and Wine. I've got some other things in there.
Well, we'll get you in touch with Ryan Gosling, because in 2017 he was part of a producing team that got the rights to Underwater Welder.
Really?
Now it's been
I was like, it's
been 5 years, and
I think he's a little too pretty for the role, but I think he could do it.
He was
to produce it.
Yeah. There was no word on if he would star in it or anything like that. And as far as I know, there hasn't been any movement on it. This has been 5 years now.
No, but I think if Sweet Tooth season 2 does well, Essex County does well, you're going to see the people who've been buying up Lemire rights, including Descender, and Black Hammer was purchased by the same studio that did Batman Begins.
I think.
Like all of this stuff is out there.
80 After Death was bought up after the first issue came out.
Yeah, and I think this or 80 After Death, Charlie Kaufman would be the best. I mean, like just like mind-bending psycho things that are low budget. You know, they're not expensive. Eternal Sunshine on the Spotless Mind. This is that.
This book would be like a. You got to think a fairly straightforward, like 90 to 100-minute movie. You know,
90 minutes does the job.
You got small cast,
lots of flashbacks,
one location,
low budget. Yeah,
you need a big dunk tank. That's about it.
I would say,
So it's one of the many things that are allegedly in some level of production. But like I said, that was announced in 2017, and
you bring back Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe from The Lighthouse. They stay in black and white. One of them plays the younger, and one plays the older version. And, bam, you're almost there already.
Robert Eggers, the Underwater Welder. That'd be interesting. There is something, you did mention the idea of black and white. One thing I did note was in a lot of Lemire's a little more recent books that he's drawn in and written and drawn in together, maybe like the past 7-8 years, they've always been black and white with usually like a small tinge of color. I think I called it like the Schindler's List effect, where it's all black and white, but we're going to highlight one thing in a panel. Maybe it's a red thing, a blue thing, or whatever. Roughneck did that. Frogcatcher's Maze Book. These are all more recent things. Royal City was like full on color. That's the
last thing he colored, I think.
Yeah. But like Essex County, which is obviously older than Underwater Welder, that's straight black and white. Underwater Welder is all black and white. And I think it's interesting that instead of using tinges of color or whatnot, he uses kind of the negative space and uses the blacks for like when kind of during the storm when he leaves, when him and Susie are kind of separate right there. Like when the lightning crashes, he uses that he just plays into the two-tone or like the grayscale nature of it without having to use an area of tinge of color here and there. Because I think you could easily have done things like whenever the watch appears, that's like a bright gold or something, Yeah. There are ways you could have done it. But I think it's interesting that he doesn't do it here, but eventually, like I said, the works that follow, he does start throwing that little bit of color in, that little bit of highlight, that little bit of accent.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he had done this book now, does it read differently if he does those little accents? Because something like The Watch would have jumped. Every time you saw The Watch, whether it's in the bottom of the ocean or when it's in the back of the truck, when you see that,
and I think the invariable tendency with that is that you would also see more of The Watch if that was the only thing that was colored.
Probably.
Because it would feel like, well, we can't go 30 pages without the color.
You need to keep coming back to that. You need to keep hammering that.
And so I think sometimes that Schindler's List thing can be overdone or force you into like repetitiveness. Maze Book, I probably need to revisit. I was very disappointed in Maze Book. I thought it was a lot of build-up with kind of a letdown. And I would say I found it less disappointing than Primordial, which was the other book he had last year. And I found Primordial to be like just a huge, big, expansive dreamscape that wrapped like more abruptly than anything I've ever read, with nothing to say about anything.
I think that's fair. I enjoyed Maze Book. I thought that was really good. Again, that's a story about. That's a story about parents and children but that one's from the parent perspective.
I thought that was a widowing one, where he was he had lost his wife. No. Yeah, he lost his child.
It's his daughter. Yeah. So again, we're talking about generational things.
And the Frogcatcher was a deathbed.
Yeah.
Recounting.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that one. I pre-ordered it, and it came in the mail on my birthday, the day it came out. And I was sitting on my like front porch, and I was like, "Oh, this is thinner than I expected." I was expecting Underwater Welder size, and truth be told, Frogcatchers is definitely under 100 pages.
Oh yeah,
it's like a long single comic issue.
It's like a. I mean, it probably could have been like a square bound prestige style format.
Yeah,
that wouldn't have been unreasonable. But yeah, it's pretty thin. It's a pretty small, quick story.
And I finished it in one sitting and have not revisited it. And I remember that I liked it. It felt like a shorter version of this.
Yes, it does. Yes,
and this feels like a shorter version of Essex County.
Yeah,
and so it's like on one hand, that's theme, that's style, that's him having.
I think the thing with Essex County, and I do think we'll get to that book at some point, is that story is less narrative. That's more like it's almost like you're reading like a history book.
Yes,
it's less narrative. I do think
it's like a fictitious memoir.
Yeah. I do think saying that Frogcatchers is like a condensed version of Underwater Welder. I think that's because the themes are very much the same, but there in Frogcatchers though, it's just him. It's the sequence when Jack is back in town and he's interacting with his 10-year-old self in the scuba suit.
Right.
Like that's all of Frogcatchers. It's
if you took that panel and just zoomed in
and said, what would this conversation look like? The idea of going back to a younger version of self on that kind of exploration.
That's another Lemireism is characters having conversation with younger, older versions of themselves.
Yeah.
Which really has been like MCU Phase 4 in a nutshell. Is characters interacting with, Loki's interacting with variants of himself.
Well, yeah, they're
Moon Knight is interacting with certain versions of himself in a way.
Those are different versions.
Spider-Man interacting with multiversal self.
Yeah.
Doctor Strange not only interacting but learning from and sharpening himself from multiversal versions.
But those are different versions of the same character. Here, this is more like what we saw in.
Well, isn't your younger self a different version of you?
Yes and no. What we're seeing in the MCU, those are actual different versions of you.
Right. Yeah. Not just time versions. Yeah.
That is a different version of you, of your entire existence. What we're seeing here is basically what we see in Paper Girls Volume 2, when the two Aarons meet. That and of course
two Aarons, two Tiffs.
Of course, in that story, when we're talking about time travel, the two characters are literally meeting. They're actually meeting. Right. The way that Lemire does things is that it's much more ethereal in that, it's less important about the mechanics of how you're meeting or why you're meeting. Is this a projection of my either older or younger self? Is this a dream? Am I actually doing? None of that matters. In Paper Girls, they got into a time machine and went into the future. That's what happened. That's how we're talking to these people.
Right.
Here, and in a lot of other stories, it's less defined because it's not important. What's important is what comes of the interaction, and it all depends on who our point of view character is. Are we following the older character meeting the younger character, or are we following the younger character who's meeting the older character? Because the perspective is always one or the other in Lemire stories. Yes, and it's not always the same. So it's
it would be sloppy to let both characters be true to themselves.
Yes,
it's always the young person putting words in the mouth of the old person, or vice versa.
Yes, the perspective that we come into, whether it's the older version, the younger version, is always there to learn something from the other. Something is being revealed in that way, and then because again, when we talk about time as this constant theme for Lemire, again, it's not about time travel per se. It is just the idea of time and the expression of time and the experience of time. However he feels about going about telling that specific story, and it is something he plays with through all of his work. And we mentioned it, I think, briefly. I don't think we really went into it, but the introduction to this book is a letter written by Damon Lindelof, And
Which I think maybe I'll close with that.
okay, all right.
Because there are some great lines in there.
There are some good stuff.
If nothing else, a cheap shot at Canadians.
Yeah, but the one thing I wanted to mention was, Damon Lindelof is a huge fan of Jeff Lemire, but they've also worked together. They did a small short story, an 8-page short story. When was it? In 2013. So this letter in the front of Underwater Welder is written it's dated February 2012. So he's in the middle of doing Lost or whatnot, which obviously plays very fast and loose with time. But there was a one-shot called Vertigo's Time Warp, which came out in 2013. And
oh, yeah. I just didn't realize he was on that.
Yes.
Okay.
They did the opening story. Lindelof wrote it, or maybe they wrote it together. I don't know if they wrote it together, but it's definitely Lemire's artwork. And it's about, this is an issue that's about time travel. It's about a man being chased by a dinosaur. And at every moment, he meets another version of himself who does something to get him further along. And all the way until the end, when the oldest version of himself comes back, gives the version we're following, the quote-unquote youngest version, gives him his time machine. And the implication is the oldest version of him, of the same time traveler, stays to be eaten by the dinosaur. And the implication is that all throughout his life, he's going to keep coming back. He's going to come back at a certain time to do this thing with the raft. And he's going to come back later to help him up this cliff. And come back later, all these things. And the older version basically says to himself, no, you're going to do these things because that's what needs to be done. Because that's what has to happen for us to get to this point. And so, again, the whole one shot is very great. It's all about time travel and time work, and different time stories. There's a very interesting Tom King written story in this one shot as well. Early work for him. But yeah, so it's an interesting pairing, Lindelof and Lemire, because again, all of Lindelof's, his thing he's most known for is Lost. And so time travel, manipulation of time, exploration of time, how it works, what it means, such a central theme. And that's a theme that flows through all of Lemire's work.
There are also objects in Lost where people touch them and have visions, hallucinations, much like this watch.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they came after this. And we know that he read this. So it's interesting to see the influence in both directions, because I have frequently thought, Lemire got started really writing comics a little after Lost was on the air, and really banks on that Lost
hold on. When did Lost
time
go
technique.
Off the air?
I want to say Lost was starting in 2004 and went 7 seasons.
Yeah, final season was 2010.
Okay.
So that is before Underwater Welder comes out.
Okay. Yeah, so there's no Lemire influence on Lost.
Yeah.
But there, I think, had to be Lost influence on Lemire.
Probably so. But
and by the way, that's not a criticism of any to say like that's an influence. It's like if I was a comic writer, everything we cover in this podcast would be an influence. Yeah. And I see that as a good thing.
But again, I think these are also, the idea of the meaning and the use of time that's just something that flows through all of his work. It was in Essex County, which is, it was in Lost Dogs. There's his earliest work. So it's just something that's there. So it's something that interests him and clearly continues to interest him. And I just think it's kind of a match that someone like Lindelof would read his work and kind of immediately connect with it. Like they're kindred spirits.
I just get happy every time I hear that someone not in comics is really into comics. Yeah. Like learning that Damon Lindelof reads comics, it's like totally makes sense. Yeah. First of all, he was working closely with Brian K. Vaughan for some of Lost, right?
Well, I don't know about closely. He's in the writer's room. But yeah, there is. But yeah, he is someone who's clearly his pop culture knowledge and basis is not dissimilar from ours. He's not too much older than either of us. I think he might be the same age as me, actually, or pretty close to it.
Well, that just makes me feel like I haven't accomplished enough.
Well, yeah, I definitely haven't. But it's the idea that, the comics were a definite influence on him. And said, he's, how much interest he has in ever writing comics. Obviously, he went ahead and did an incredible adaptation / reimagining of Watchmen. When I remember when they announced that, I immediately poo-pooed it. It was like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. And he did an incredible job taking source material and doing his own, like understanding the meaning of that and reinterpreting it into something completely new, but felt of the same universe because he understood the heart of the comic, as opposed to what other directors do, which just,
excellent self-restraint.
I'm just going to do this panel, this panel, this panel, and that's a movie because that's what it's supposed to. No. It's he internalized Watchmen. He understood the material and regurgitated something that was new. So it's clearly something that's in his DNA. Right. And I think it'd be kind of cool. I would love to see like a Lindelof, like a comic miniseries. Like if he had some idea, work with some, because he could pull in, he'd probably get Lemire to draw it. I'll be honest, because they've worked together before. But I think there's some interesting ideas there. He has that kind of mind that I'd love to see. And so I do think it's kind of cool that, when he hooks up with a comic creator that is of his same sensibility. Because someone like Lemire is that is the same kind of thinking, the same kind of, I don't know about total viewpoint, but I mean
no, but it's the same. They love the same storytelling mechanics, right?
Yeah, but also,
so they love the mechanics. I think they love the same themes.
I think so, yeah, because not just time. You think about one of the big things in Lost, probably the biggest theme of Lost isn't time travel. It's fathers and sons.
Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So
starting in the first or second episode,
it's all about fathers and sons, and it's about generational trauma and what's passed down.
Right. So what you're saying is that Jack's father here is probably a smoke monster.
It's Jack's father here, not too dissimilar than Jack's
Sorry for anyone
son.
who didn't see Lost.
Yeah. But also you think about, Lindelof went and adapted Tom Perrotta's novel The Leftovers, which is, it's got a...
Oh, yeah. I've heard great things about that show.
The first season wasn't great. It was pretty slow. Because I think the first season was like he's trying to hold to what happens in the book. And the book's very good. Tom Perrotta's a great author. But once he gets past that and kind of expands the world out, the show gets really, really good. But again, that is also about families and generations and sins of the past, sins of the father passing on to the children, next generation. So it's more than just the larger sense of what is time. There are these other factors here that someone like Lindelof, I think, when he reads Lemire's stuff, just there is an instant connection there. I do think that's really cool. And if you haven't, go out, if you're interested, go out and find that Time Warp one shot by Vertigo. I said it came out in 2013.
I don't think it's particularly valuable or hard
no,
to find.
It's not. I mean, other than I do think it might be Damon Lindelof's first credited comic work, maybe his own comic work. Again, it's it's his first. I think it's billed as his first Vertigo work. I think there's a Gail Simone story in there, I think.
Okay, I was going to say sometimes that's really meaningful.
There's an early Tom King in there, like I said. So it's not hard to find.
No, but I will say I'm a bad comic speculator, and it's not for lack of trying. There was one of those, DC started doing those 100-page giant mashup things where it was here's 4 random issues of Batman or something like that.
Oh yeah.
One of the ones they did was Our Fighting Forces, and one of the stories in there was written by Barack Obama and was a true story. And I thought, a Barack Obama writing credit in a comic? That's going to be worth a ton of money. And I read it and I was like, I think he verbally gave the story to someone who was a comic writer, and then they wrote it. But they were
and that
it'll sell some books to put Barack Obama's name on there.
That ends up being story by and then script by,
heavy lifting by. Yeah.
No, what you want the Barack Obama comic book you want is the one where he was on the Amazing Cover of Spider-Man. That's the one that's important, not the first writing credit or first credited writing. however it is.
Hey, I've got an Avengers issue with David Letterman on the cover.
Yeah, that's probably not as valuable.
But it will be when he's gone.
Yeah, maybe so.
Maybe.
But yeah, so again, the idea of these overarching themes of time, it's in this whatever we're calling this sequence with Jack, a dream sequence or his consciousness sequence, whatever it is, because when he comes to,
I just call it dreams. He didn't physically walk through the town, and the town was literally empty.
Because when he comes back into the quote unquote real time, he's still underwater. Again, it's like
right, and he has finite oxygen, so it wasn't days.
Yeah, so it's very much like the opening scene when he goes for the watch and doesn't get there. He basically wakes up and someone's like pulling him up. Wake up, we're going back to the surface because you've been non-responsive or whatever for, it very well could have been like 20 seconds, which probably, I'm sure for those who can dive, if you're unresponsive for like 20 seconds, probably not the greatest thing in the world, especially if they're radioing down, being like, Jack, you okay? Wake up, what's going on? But yeah, so when he's taken out of time, where it's a dream or whatnot, it's a chance for him to reconcile his past, his present, his future, to walk around and deal with all these things. It gives him that space. And so that's however that's presented in a Lemire story, that's a thing that you're always going to see. He's going to interact again with some level of supernatural. However, if it's actually happening or not, again, none of that's really important. But here, Jack gets to walk through his
I'm glad
town.
to hear you say that because, that's never mattered to me.
No.
And I don't want to belittle it for people who...
It matters to me in stories when the story tells you it matters. If the story tells you this is going to be important, then me as a reader, you better then deliver on that. You better at least explain to me, put the effort in to tell me why it's important. I may not agree with it. I may read that and be like, that's stupid. But you have to put the effort in to show that you have covered this.
Well, and the key word there being show. Show me it's important. Don't tell me something is important.
Yeah, but put the
demonstrate it.
Put the effort in to say that you, the creator, have thought about this. And because you have said this mechanic is important, I'm going to show you why I think it's important. And I could read that and be like, that was awesome, or that sucked. But a story like Lemire's writing, the how is not important. It's never been important. It's just something you accept. You're reading the story and you're following Jack's journey, and this is a part of it. And again, it's the idea of it's clearly just something is happening in his head. It's momentary, and he's reliving a lifetime of memories in this moment at the bottom of the ocean simply by grabbing this pocket watch. That's triggered something in the recesses of his brain, and he is now
and he gets to this great epiphany. Page 191. He starts saying, "My name is Jack Joseph." We've heard this before. I'm 33 years old, the same age my father was when he went looking for something he couldn't find. Was it my fault? I don't know. Maybe he wanted to leave. Maybe he wanted to die. Susie was right. It doesn't matter anymore. In the end, knowing the truth isn't going to bring him back. And now I'm the one who's missing. Sorry, kid. But the truth is, I started disappearing a long time ago. He's gone, but maybe it's not too late for me. Maybe I can still change things. Maybe I don't have to become a ghost too. And then I love this. This happens, I think, twice in the book. The next page. My name is Jack Joseph, and I was an underwater welder. I had, scratched out have a wife and a child on the way, a boy. So he reconciles his marriage right there in his head. There's one other time where he gets a word wrong in his head. He does some onomatopoeia or something that sounds like something else, and it scratches out. Even in his subconscious thinking, I'm like, this is the everyman of him. It's like he's even an English lit degree, and still occasionally it's like stumbles on the word in his head, and I do that all the time in my own head.
And I love in these moments whenever they're either Jack's thoughts or the actual like letter he's writing to Susie or whatnot. What I love is how the lettering changes. That it goes from the main text of the story, everything that happens in the story is all in uppercase, which is very traditional comic lettering because it's very easy to read. It's very consistent. When it goes into his head and it's his thoughts and his writings, it goes to a mixed case scenario, which inherently just feels more natural. It feels kind of interior. It feels sloppier. And so it works then when you're reading his inner monologue and he's literally crossing off words and correcting them. It fits the tone of those scenes and those panels by changing the lettering, so you know immediately, oh, we're in Jack's head.
Right.
Because even so, like that part you were reading right there, when you jump to the sorry kid, that is something that Peter is saying, because this narration is happening over what it's happening over what Jack in his dream sequence is writing a letter out. That is happening in real time. He says, sorry, kid, as he's writing the rest of this letter.
Right.
Because this is the moment when, in his dreamscape, he is going to row back out to the rig and jump back into the water, find the watch, and then this is how he gets transported back to the real world. Because this letter is his reconciliation, his understanding, his clarity at this point. But you can see at that point when he's apologizing to this kid, that because it's the change in case, and it's a word balloon out of his mouth, that's something he's saying in real time as he's writing, while all the narration boxes are this mixed case where those are his inner thoughts. That's what he's trying to express. That's what he's getting across.
But I mean, I just love this because this whole time he goes to find his father, and really he finds himself. Yeah. And he differentiates himself from his father, which is how he finds himself. And then it looks like he's recovered by someone else again.
Yeah.
At the end of this, and is sprinting, not even changed his clothes, back to his house. Finally gets to the hospital, finds his wife and son waiting, and his wife seems happy to have him back. He looks at the kid, he's tearing up, and then we have the ominous tick tick tick, which I think is ominous.
I don't know if
this isn't done.
I don't mean it's meant to be ominous and it's not like.
It's not like the Telltale Heart or something, but it's like
I think it's meant to be. I think this is meant to be an uplifting and hopeful ending. I really do.
An uptick. Jeez,
we went like an hour before.
I know.
No, I do think it's meant to be. I think the watch is him having it there. Is one. I think it's meant that he actually did find the watch down there.
Yeah, and I believe it is the actual watch that just gets carried out further each year.
I think so. That it is actually the watch there. So it wasn't just a hallucination. He did go and find something there. There was something tangible there. He wasn't making that up. And in the process, he has this whole sequence when he reconciles kind of all his feelings, past, present, and future. It all comes together. And when he reemerges, he has this watch now, and it represents this full self. And I think also the fact that it's working, because if I'm not mistaken, I think the watch was broken when they found it.
It was, yeah, he said it was junk. Yeah, he said maybe I can fix it up or something like that.
Yeah.
But, I think his dad's interest in a watch was not about whether it told time or not. It was whether it was valuable or not.
Yeah.
And, 10-year-old Jack is like, well, I like it because I think it looks cool. And grown-up Jack is like, this is my connection to my father.
Yeah.
And so, hilariously, so much of this is centered around a watch, and the watch being able to tell time has just no bearing at all on any of it. It's a purely representative watch, but it is a real physical object.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not even like a metaphor for time.
No.
Which you could easily think it might be.
I mean, he did throw the watch in the water and lost quite a bit of time in his life until he went and recovered it from the water.
That's really
so you
stretching.
could say
That's
that.
really stretching.
I'm stretching it thin, but
really stretching.
Look, we're almost at the 2-hour mark here, so unless you want more water puns,
I really don't.
We have to start getting into time humor.
I really don't.
A time heist. So anyway, for me, this is a 5 out of 5 book.
Yeah, same.
I think the fact The fact that I can keep chewing on it. And I think there are some people who are very into projecting lots of meaning or subjectively importing their own meaning into anything they read. I'm certainly fine with that as long as people are reading and enjoying things. I don't really care. To me, I'm still primarily interested in what the author is expressing or what I think they're trying to express. Like getting to the core of that is what I go for in a book, and then how I connect with what the author's intent was. But, I was talking to someone lately who said, like, oh, I don't care at all about authorial intent. Like, once they write it, it's not theirs anymore. And I was like...
I mean, that's valid, I think.
I get it. Yes, it's valid. And I think there's a lot you can get out of reading when you accept those terms.
Yes.
I'm still more interested in what I'm interested in. And I'm like, I think... You have to say that mine is at least equally valid.
Oh, absolutely. No, I personally tend to do the same thing as you. I want to understand what I think author's intent is important because I want to understand where they're coming from, because then that can help shape my reaction to it. Because if I understand, if I've misinterpreted, I think what an author is aiming to do, I think that can skew, for both good and for ill, my reaction to it. If I think I have a good understanding of what they're trying to do, what they're trying to get across, what their intent is, even though I'm as the reader, as the consumer, I'm allowed to interpret this thing. I'm not forced to interpret the way the author does.
Right.
But
the reason we do a Zero episode,
I still want to know where it comes from.
Is that, if Jeff Lemire were this weird prodigy who popped up and only did one book ever, and we didn't know anything about him, we wouldn't do a Zero episode. We would say, we don't know anything about the writer. We have to bring everything to this ourselves. But the fact that there's so many common threads and themes that we get a real idea of what he has to say, how he likes to say it, to me, that's the exciting part about following one author.
I agree. Yeah, definitely.
At the depth that we do.
You can, when there are similar themes and he attacks them in different ways. Like we said, time is always important, but it's always about, sometimes it's a flashback. Sometimes it's
right. It's not
actual time
like
travel.
He has strict rules that apply to every book. It's just like
he's going to attack the same problem, but he's going to present it in a different way every time, because however the story dictates and whatever it needs. But he's always going to revisit those same ideas. But again, sometimes when it's younger protagonists getting wisdom from the older protagonist, or vice versa.
Right.
It switches. It's parent to child. It's parent to sibling. They're all of a piece, and you can see when you look at them all together, you can see how everything lays out and everything fits together. But individually, you can see how there are separate and unique stories.
Right.
And I think that's really cool.
And I would love at some point, toward the end of his career, if he were to sell, like beautiful leather-bound volumes of all his works across publishers, and just have like a Jeff Lemire collection in chronological order.
With all the same side bindings, so it looks nice on the shelf.
Exactly.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. That'd be pretty cool.
So yeah. But anyway, I think I've said. I mean, I could either keep talking for 2 more hours, or I can say, this is what I have to say. That I've communicated, I think, why this is so important to me, and it blows my mind that as we record this, we're 8 months pregnant, and when people hear this, I will have a 2-month-old child in my arms.
Yes.
It's very weird to me.
That's how the calendar works, Mike.
I know. It's how the calendar works. It's also how babies work. And they come with hats.
They do.
Another West Wing reference for everyone out there. But anyway, I just adore this book. I had a little fear and trepidation approaching this again, because I thought, it's been a few years since I read this. I've read so many comics since then. What if it would just hit me special at that time, and it no longer feels important to me? When in reality, we planned this months ago. I hadn't opened it again. I forgot that his wife was 8 months pregnant, and that her name was Susan, and that this was my life as I'm turning to read it right now. And It's I think you alluded to this earlier, but it's one of those great things about great books where you read it several times in the course of your lifetime and you're like, well, what changed the book or me? And it's obviously you who's changing, and you interact with the same material in a different way. Yeah. So anyway,
I will say now that I've read this again, listen, I hadn't read it in several years since I first read it, but now that I have read it for this, I think this will be a book that falls into the rotation of books I read like almost yearly. I have a handful of books that whenever I find the time, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to reread this today. And I'll just go through and reread a book. And it's once a year of the year or something like that. And it is books that I have attachments to that I can see myself, that I know when I first read this 12 years ago, I know what I was thinking then. And now I read it now. And I read it 5 years ago, 3 years ago. I can see myself change. I think this will now be another book that you've now reminded me of that I'm going to go back to and want to revisit, because I think I'm going to keep pulling things and seeing things differently. And prior to you suggesting it for the show to discuss, I don't know. I would have considered someone like Essex County for Jeff Lemire, but maybe it would have not have done it because that book is massive.
It's a much longer reread.
It's huge,
yes.
And so that's a much bigger commitment. If I'm going to reread Essex County, I'm going to sit down and really reread it. But Underwater Welder, I don't know if it'll ever surpass. It probably can't surpass Essex County as my favorite Jeff Lemire written drawn book, but I think it is definitely something I'll go back to and reread on a fairly regular basis, because I think it's one I can see myself finding new things every time, things that I didn't know before, things I didn't realize before, because maybe I didn't have you don't have the life experience, you don't have the perspective for it, and I think it's a great book to grow with and reread and revisit on every now and then.
Well, and as you just heard, I made this selection. Which is not your favorite Jeff Lemire. I made Grass King's selection, which is not your favorite Matt Kint, Tyler, and Hillary Jenkins.
Yeah.
And I think we collaboratively pitched Paper Girls as our first one.
Yeah.
This means we're so long overdue for you to pick one.
Yes.
And me to tag along. And
Sure.
I think that's what we're doing next.
I think so. Do you want to announce it now?
I don't see why not.
Okay, sure.
We're in July announcing what's coming in November.
That's true. Yeah. So after this one shot of Underwater Welder and this kind of this supersized episode, our next book after this is going to be Kill or Be Killed by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Mike would say Jeff Lemire is his favorite comic creator of all time, probably, and currently.
Of all time,
yeah. My favorite current team is Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. I have read everything they've done together, and any book they put out, I pre-order and buy day of and read it day of. I think they are the best team out there making comics. And Kill or Be Killed is actually, it is not my favorite of their works. That would be Criminal, but Criminal is it's a big anthology series. It's not really ripe for discussion, but Kill or Be Killed is a recent book that I think gets more and more relevant as the years go by and the world just gets worse and worse. As we continued on a path of not getting better, Kill or Be Killed, I think, becomes more and more relevant. And I look forward to diving into it because, Mike, I don't believe you have read it.
I have not. No, I've read Fade Out, and I feel like I've read enough to get the vibe of Brubaker and Phillips, but I've not done the deep dive. I haven't done Reckless. I haven't done Criminal. I haven't done. I actually have not yet done Gotham Central, even though I bought the omnibus when it came out this year. I know that's big two, but I feel like since that's a big two that's not part of a continuity, that one might be acceptable for the podcast at some point.
It kind of is. Maybe later on. That's
but it's not like
book.
It's like when Gotham Central was running and DC was doing a big crossover event. Gotham Central wasn't impacted by that, right?
I don't think it did. I think it did at some point. I have to remember. It's been a while since I've reread it. But yeah. So Brubaker and Phillips, they are the master of noir. All their stories have a noir bent to it, whether it's straight crime noir, horror noir, kind of a superhero noir, whatever it is. That's what they do, and it's what they do best. So Kill or Be Killed from Image Comics. It is it's 4 trade back collections. We'll be diving into that one next week. What's the schedule?
Yeah.
Next week.
It may be a break week. We'll see. Possibly a zero episode.
We'll discuss all of our Brubaker and Phillips stuff.
And
then jump
I think
right into it.
It's refreshing. It's the first one that's a book title that isn't someone's job title. You had the Grass Kings of the Grass Kingdom. You had the Paper Girls.
In
you had the Underwater Welder.
Yeah. So maybe we should have done Criminal, because in Criminal everybody is a criminal.
They are all criminals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Gotham Central is it's a place. It's not a job description.
Yeah.
And then I think after that, on the horizon, possibly a brighter, warmer note toward the end of the year, leading into Christmas, we are going to break our founding rule and go into the big two. But don't worry,
kind of.
It's a limited run, and sort of. It's like by acquisition.
It's like big two adjacent.
Yes, and we're going to do Mark Russell's Flintstone run.
Yes, it's Mark Russell and Steve Pugh,
which came to me as a recommendation on the X-Ray Vision podcast from Jason Mantzoukas, who was on and plugged that book. Obviously, I'll make at least one passing effort to reach out to Jason on Twitter, see if he wants to come on our podcast and do a deep dive on Flintstones.
Have you read it yet?
I really doubt it. No, I haven't. Okay. It's on my coffee table. Okay. Between my normal reading, my pull list, and what we're reading for the podcast, I am running out of time. However...
Well, that's good you're having a child soon, because that gives you nothing but extra time.
Well, I've actually heard, you're tired because you're up every 3 hours. But when you're not actively, changing a diaper and putting the kid back down, you actually do have a fair amount of time. Mm-hmm. And I've got some paternity leave. So I'll be tired in reading it, which will taint my perspective.
Well, that sounds like a promise you're going to read more now. But no, Flintstones is a fantastic book. I think it's going to be really fun. I remember when that book came out, and when it finished, I read it in real time, starting with about the issue. I think I picked up the first 3 issues or first 4 issues. I missed it when it first came out, and first months it came out. But from there, I read it as it was released, and I remember saying to people that I thought it was going to be a book that people were going to come back to randomly because someone's going to tell them to read it. They'll be like, Flintstones, what is this? And they're going to read it and be like, holy crap, that was incredible. And I truly believe that. Mike, you're going to feel that when you read it. And when we get to that, a much lighter topic, because Kill or Be Killed is very adult, very mature, very dark, pretty bleak. So get ready for that. But afterwards, we'll cleanse the palate with some Flintstones. And
then we'll find something to start the new year off, right?
Absolutely.
I think by that point, we'll hopefully have a few mailbag questions, suggestions, things like that. I would love for someone to stun us or stump us and say, "How about this?" And neither of us have read it before
or even heard of it.
Maybe. And we just dive in for the first time. We're also interested in creator owned. We've had some people following our Instagram account who are like, we don't have a publisher. We are making comics. And, I'm ready to put the feelers out and say, hey, if one of you wants to send us some stuff, we'd be happy to, if it's good, we'd be happy to read it, plug it, podcast about it, and point people to it.
Maybe so.
I don't think we're a big enough platform that you're really going to get your money's worth out of sending it to us, but we will definitely love to consider it, and I think we like the medium enough that we're willing to try anything. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this oversized episode, and we will see you next time for Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, Kill or Be Killed.
Peace.